Kit Carson, Part 9. During our stay at the fort, 2 of our party became deranged. I presume from the effects of starvation, followed by an abundance of food. One morning, one of them jumped up perfectly wild and inquired for his mule, although it was tied close beside him. He started to the mountains to look for it. Sometime later, when his absence became known, men were sent to search for him, and we looked through all the neighborhood and made inquiries of the Indians, but we could hear nothing of him. We remained a few days vainly awaiting his return, and then departed, leaving word with Sutter to make search, and if possible find him. He did so, and sometime after our departure the man was found. He was kept at the fort and properly cared for until he recovered his health, and was then sent home to the States by Mr. Sutter. About the 1st of April, 1844, we were ready to start for home. We went up the valley of the San Joaquin and crossed the Sierra Nevada and Coast Range by a beautiful low pass. We continued under the Coast Range till we struck the Spanish Trail, which we followed to the Mojave River, a small stream that rises in the Coast Range and is lost in the Great Basin. We continued down the Mojave and made an early camp at the point where the trail leaves the river. In the evening, a Mexican man and a boy came to our camp. They informed us that they belonged to a party of Mexicans from New Mexico. They were encamped with 2 other men and 2 women at some distance from the main party, herding horses. The man and the boy were mounted, and the 2 men and women were in their camp, when a party of Indians charged on them for the purpose of running off their stock. They told the men and women to make their escape and that they would guard the horses. They ran the animals off from the Indians and left them at a spring in the desert about 30 miles from camp. We started for the place they described and found that the animals had been taken away by the Indians who had followed them. The Mexican asked Fremont to aid him to recover his animals. Fremont told his men that they might volunteer for this service if they wished, and that he would furnish horses for them to ride. Godey and myself volunteered, supposing that some of the other men would join us, but none did, and Godey and I and the Mexican took the trail of the missing animals. When we'd gone 20 miles, the Mexican's horse gave out, and we sent him back. The night was very dark, and at times we had to dismount to feel for the trail. We perceived by the signs that the Indians had passed after sunset, and we became much fatigued. In unsaddling our horses, we wrapped ourselves in the wet saddle blankets and laid down. The night was miserably cold, and we could not make a fire for fear of its being seen. So we arose very early and went down into a deep ravine, where we made a small fire to warm ourselves. As soon as it was light, we again took the trail, and at sunrise perceived the Indians encamped 2 miles ahead of us. They had killed 5 of the animals and were having a feast on them. Our horses could travel no further, and we hid them among the rocks and continued on foot. We reached the camp unperceived and crawled in among the horses. A young colt became frightened, and this alarmed the rest. The Indians at length noticed the commotion and sprang for their arms. Although they were about 30 in number, we decided to charge them. I fired and shot one. Godey fired and missed, but reloaded and fired again, killing another. Only 3 shots had been fired, and 2 Indians were slain. The remainder now fled, and taking the 2 rifles, I ascended a hill to keep guard while Godey scalped the dead Indians. He scalped the one he had shot and was proceeding towards the other one, who was behind some rocks. He was not yet dead, and as Godey approached, he raised up and let fly an arrow, which passed through Godey's shirt collar. He again fell back, and Godey finished him. We rounded up the animals and drove them to the place where we had concealed our own. Here we changed horses and rode back to our camp with all of the animals, save the ones the Indians had killed for feast. We then marched on to where the Mexicans had left the 2 men and women. We discovered the bodies of the men horribly mutilated. The women, we suppose, were carried into captivity, but such was not the case. For a party traveling in our rear found their bodies very much mutilated and staked to the ground. We continued our march without molestation till we reached the point where the trail leaves the Virgin River. There we intended to remain a day, our animals being much fatigued, but discovering a better situation, we moved our camp a mile further on. Here one of our Canadians missed one of his mules, and knowing that it must have been left at the first camp, started back after it without informing Fremont or any of the party of his project. A few hours later he was missed. The members of the horse guard said he had gone to our last camp to look for his mule, and I was sent with 3 men to seek him. On reaching the camp, we saw a pool of blood where he had fallen from his horse, and knew that he was killed. We followed the trail of his animal to the point where it crossed the river, but we could not find his body. We then returned to camp and informed Fremont of his death. In the morning, he went with a party to seek the body, but it could not be found. He was a brave, noble-souled fellow, and I was saddened by his death. I had been in many an Indian fight with the Canadian, and I am confident that if he was not taken unawares, he killed 1 or 2 Indians before he fell. We now left the Virgin River, keeping to the Spanish Trail, till we passed the Vega of Santa Clara, when we left the trail and struck out towards Utah Lake. We crossed the lake and went to the Winty, thence to the Green River and Brown's Hole, then to Little Snake River and on to the mouth of St. Vrain's Fork. We then crossed the mountains and struck the Laramie River below the new park. We passed this and went on into the old park. From there we moved to the Bala Salado, the headwaters of the South Fork of the Platte, then to the Arkansas River at the point where it leaves the mountains, and down it to Bent's Fort. We arrived on July the 2nd, 1844, and remained until after the 4th, when Fremont and his party started for the States, and I set out for the Taos. On the 4th, Mr. Bent gave a splendid dinner to Fremont and his party. The day was celebrated as well as in many of the towns and the states. I remained in Taos till March 1845, when Dick Owens and I concluded that we had rambled enough and decided to settle down on some good stream and make a farm. We went to the Little Cimarron, about 55 miles east of Taos, built 2 little huts, put in considerable grain, and commenced getting out timber to enlarge our improvements. The year before, I had promised Fremont that I would join him in case he should return for the purpose of making any further exploration. About the 1st of August, 1845, he reached Bent's Fort, where he inquired for me and learned that I was on the Cimarron. He sent an express to me and Owens, and I sold our improvements for about half its worth and joined Fremont, who employed both of us. We went up the Arkansas to the point where it comes out of the mountains, thence to the Bala Salado, thence to the Arkansas above the canyon, and up to its headwaters. From here we crossed over to Piney River and descended to within 25 miles of its mouth, then to the Grand River, which we crossed, then to the head of White River. We went down White River almost to its junction with the Green River, crossed the latter stream and went in on to the Winty, then up the latter almost to the mountains, which we crossed to Provost Fork. This river was named for a party of trappers led by a man named Provost, who were defeated on it by a band of Indians. All of the party but 4 were killed. We traveled down the Provost to Little Utah Lake and followed its outlet almost to Great Salt Lake. Here Fremont made his camp some distance south of our former encampment. In our front was a large island, the largest in the lake, and we were informed by the Indians that there was an abundance of fresh water on it and plenty of antelope. Fremont went to explore it, taking me and a few more men along. We found good grass, water, and timber, and plenty of game. We remained there 2 days, killing game and exploring the island, which was about 15 miles long and 5 miles in breadth. In going to the island, we rode on horseback over salt from the thickness of a wafer to 12 inches. We returned to our camp and remained a day on the south side of the lake near the last fresh water. From here, Fremont sent Maxwell, Archambault, Lachines, and myself to cross the desert, which I have often heard had never before been crossed by white men. Old trappers would speak of the impossibility of crossing it, saying that water could not be found nor grass for the animals, but Fremont was determined to cross. Nothing his explorations required was impossible for him to perform. Before we started, it was arranged that at a certain hour of the next day, he would ascend the mountain near his camp with his telescope so that we could be seen by him, and if we found grass or water, we should make a smoke as a signal to him to advance. We traveled about 60 miles, found neither water nor grass nor a particle of vegetation, with the ground as level and bare as a barn floor. Before we struck the mountains on the west side of the lake, there we found water and grass in abundance, and kindled the signal fire. Fremont saw it and moved on with his party. Archambault went back and met him when he was about halfway across the desert. He camped one night and then the next evening at dark completed the crossing, having lost only a few of his animals. End of part 9.